That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Origin, the fifth narrative feature directed by Ava DuVernay, which premiered in competition at the 2023 Venice Film Festival, which made her the first African-American woman to have a film compete in that festival. Neon is releasing the film on December 8th, 2023.
So I actually know who this director is, so I don't have to ask you. But the movie I associate with her is Selma.
Yes, her third film, but I've been a fan since her debut, which was I Will Follow, starring Sally Richardson Whitfield and Amari Hardwick, as well as her sophomore film, Middle of Nowhere, which won her Best Director at Sundance that year. Then, of course, she also adapted Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time in 2018, and she's, multifaceted. She's done, she created Queen Sugar, she directed When They See Us, about the Central Park 5 miniseries for Netflix, and also the Oscar-nominated documentary The 13th.
This movie. Grappling with tremendous personal tragedy, writer Isabel Wilkerson sets herself on a path of global investigation and discovery as she writes Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. You read this book.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
In preparation for seeing the film when it
Yes.
hit the festival. So you can talk about that. What's your pull quote?
An intriguing approach to adapting an influential contemporary elucidation on castes, Ava DuVernay expertly marries discourse with compassion in this sometimes elementary but consistently compelling drama.
Mine. Origin is an ambitious effort that makes for an excellent conversation piece. After we watched it, we had two separate lengthy conversations, which is always a good sign.
Yeah.
And the subject matter is, profound and important and upsetting. My biggest thought after we finished it was that I wish this were a docuseries.
Sure.
Yeah, I wanted more.
But I find it a really interesting way to approach adapting this nonfiction book that, of course, was published in 2020, 2.5 months after George Floyd was murdered, and really hit a nerve. And it strikes me that this is like a biopic about a book, about the writing of the book.
I think that's a good way to describe it, that it's a biopic about the writing of a book. It was also an Oprah's book club selection.
I believe so, yeah.
Correct?
I forgot to double check that, but
If it's not, I'll edit this
I'm
out.
pretty sure.
But the story is that Isabel Wilkerson, who, when we meet her, we know that she is a writer. She has written one book that was successful.
And she's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, the first African-American woman to have that distinction.
And we see that she is getting a lot of pressure for her next book. So she's thinking about that. She's grappling with the idea of perhaps writing about Trayvon Martin.
Well, she's kind of being pressured to.
Yeah. But the organization of the film's interesting because her book is about linking the experiences of Black Americans as it relates to being brought here from Africa, slaves, and then slavery, Jim Crow up to today, how that relates to the Nazis in Germany and the caste system in India. And then her thesis statement, which comes early on, which is pretty profound, is that she says racism as the primary language to describe everything is insufficient. So you read the book, but I'm assuming based on the movie, her mission is to provide examples of why that is true.
Right.
And she does. So, basically it's like these three stories. Well, the situation with Black Americans is sort of ever present, but then we see her take a trip to Berlin and a trip to India where she becomes enlightened on a couple of situations. In Berlin, she is at a gallery and sees a photograph of some Nazis at a table having a conversation, obviously, and she gets the transcripts from that one particular meeting.
In 1934.
And discovers that these Nazis were basically trying to use how whites in America were oppressing blacks as a blueprint.
It's a framework for how they were able to legally mount the Holocaust.
So it's kind of like the aha moment, like, see, that's proof. Then she goes to India and learns about
The Dalits.
the Dalits, who are considered like the lowest tier of society in India.
I think below the lowest tier, they used to be called the Untouchables.
The Untouchables. And there is a very influential figure in India whose name I don't want to mess up.
Dr. Ambedkar, I believe.
Who is responsible for drafting the Constitution of India. So he's seen as a symbol to the Dalits. And Isabel finds out that this man was inspired by the writings of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., specifically an article he wrote in Ebony magazine.
In 1959, yeah.
About the Indians. So she links those in that way. But then I would say half the movie is really about her experience because she suffers a lot of tragedy.
Yes, like she loses all the people closest to her just before and as she is constructing this book.
Her second husband dies.
Played by Jon Bernthal.
Then her mother dies.
Played by Emily Yancey.
And then her cousin, who she was very close with, dies.
Niecy Nash, yeah. And we forgot to mention that Aunjanue Ellis Taylor is playing Isabel Wilkerson.
Who I think does a fine job.
Yeah, I've been a fan of hers since 1999 when I saw her in A Map of the World with Sigourney Weaver. And, after her Oscar nod for King Richard, which Jon Bernthal also stars in, it's nice to see her finally in front and center in a film. Especially one directed by Ava DuVernay. But she's got a lot of films on the horizon, including a Lee Daniels film I can't wait to talk about.
Oh, yes. I know about that one.
Oh, and she's also in The Color Purple as Celie's mother. She's a fragment, basically.
Oh, my goodness. That's right.
Yeah, she's been very busy.
We talked for hours about this movie, so obviously we're not going to get that in 20 more minutes. But maybe, do you want to start with how the book differs?
Well, Isabel Wilkerson does insert moments from her own life that exemplify what she's talking about. There's actually one instance on an airplane that I'm kind of glad wasn't in there because that probably was the most traumatic personal moment that she shares, where she's basically assaulted in first class on a plane. But she's always marrying these ideas to her explorations of interconnectedness, which I think work really well in showing, especially in the book, and it's mentioned here, she divides it into pillars of what is required for a caste system to be in place. And one of those is, I'm paraphrasing, but it's inferred superiority versus inferred inferiority. And there's a scene, which we discussed at length, because you, not to take words out of your mouth, didn't really like it, but with Nick Offerman as a plumber wearing a MAGA hat, and how no matter what part of the caste system you're in, learning how you play a certain sense of complicity in that and stepping outside yourself, I think is what is consistently these moments of from her personal life are meant to reflect upon.
And just in case people don't know, caste is defined as any class or group of people who inherit exclusive privileges or are perceived as socially distinct. So, of course, that could be flipped, where people are perceived as being less than or inferior. Well, since you brought up the Nick Offerman scene, so she does provide a handful of anecdotes to support sort of her own experience. The one with Nick Offerman is that her mother, whose house she now needs to renovate to sell because the mother has passed, Isabel's having an issue with the plumbing, so she contacts a plumber. It's Nick Offerman. He shows up with his Make America Great Again hat on. So she makes assumptions about him, and their exchange is very cold. She's trying to share with him that her mother just died after she was being a little prickly with him, and he's being very cold and just saying like, well, this is what I think it is. Here's my quote. And then she keeps sort of trying to elicit a response from him and then asking him about his personal life. I think of all the anecdotes, that one didn't work as well for me.
Sure, you were talking about professionalism, but I think that sometimes, as humans, we need to kind of find a different way to relate to people that we are in contact with that is, maybe just purely for business needs or purposes, but, seeing that instead of assuming that there's more that keeps us apart, there are really more with issues we can relate on than not.
I agree with you. I agree with you. So,
but yeah, at the same time,
it just didn't read as clear to me as what you're saying.
Sure.
Yeah. But another anecdote is, so the film opens with Trayvon Martin, and we see him walking innocently, talking on the phone, and then he tells the person he's on the phone with that he thinks someone is following him. So then after the incident and it's on the news, we see that Isabel is talking to her mother, an older woman, about it. And the mother and her have very differing opinions of what happened, because the mother is saying that Trayvon should have known to not like instigate the situation by not answering the man's questions. Like, it could have been de-escalated better. And
Yeah,
Isabel takes issue with that.
If he had been, obsequious and had answered the man's questions and
And I did think that was effective. Another anecdote is when Isabel is going through her mother's thing, she finds a newspaper article that references a young man who was on a softball team, and to celebrate, and this is like in the like during Jim Crow era.
a little boy.
A little boy. I'm sorry, that during Jim Crow era in the South, that they took the team to a public swimming pool, and this one little black boy on the team gets to the swimming pool, and then they cause a scene. Like, he can't get in the water. If he does, they're gonna have to disinfect it. So this poor boy has to sit outside of the pool, and it's a hard scene to watch.
Yeah.
It's emotional, but then we get one of the little players, like another little boy who was friends with the black boy,
A white boy.
now is an old man. And he's talking about how that's always haunted him. And he's always felt guilty for not trying to do something, but remembers being so confused as to why his friend couldn't join him. Moments like that were powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get a scene with Audra McDonald, whose character's name is Miss.
That's her first name, Miss.
Yeah, her first name is Miss, and her last name I think is Alice. I could be wrong, but her first name's Miss, M-I-S-S, which is important because we understand that her father named her that so that specifically white people would be forced to address her with respect. Mm-hmm. So then she tells a story about how when she was in school, because she was living in, I believe, she had moved to Texas from maybe like the West Coast to the East Coast. So it was her first time.
She said Alabama.
She was in a new school, but she hadn't been raised in an environment where she felt like she was less than. So this was her first time experiencing it when she's in school, and this male teacher is saying like, "What's your name?" And she says, "Miss." And the teacher thinks that she's being smart. Like, you don't deserve that respect. And it's a very emotional scene in the sense that she's crying, relaying it. So there are moments like that that I do think are meaningful and add a lot to Isabel's story. I think where I get a little, it's just a hard, because I didn't read the book, but from what I understand, it just seems like a hard thing to turn into a movie.
Yes, but even her thesis is really a quite a large one to wrestle with, and it really feels like it's the tip of the iceberg. Like if I was a teacher, this is something I would assign to every 10th grader to read. But it feels kind of at that level. Even the book is like a 101 level intro course to something much larger that we need to discuss, because it's like she's pulling at a thread. And when we get far back enough, there's racism, which is part of the caste system in the United States. But it really, as she says, goes beyond that. It's about human behavior and how each culture really has their own caste system of people that they put lower than and denigrate for various reasons.
Yeah, the analogy I thought was very similar, that her thesis to me could be a PhD program in and of itself. Mm-hmm. But this movie feels like a 100 level course. So it just left me hungry for more.
But that being said, I do really like two different conversations that I think Aunjanue delivers really well, and thanks to DuVernay's script as well, that really pare it down to the essence. And
is it the barbecue scene?
There's the barbecue scene, and then the sequence with Connie Nielsen in Berlin.
So the barbecue scene, Isabel goes to her cousin, played by Niecy Nash, and they're at like a family reunion, and it's fun times out in the park. And she and her cousin are very close, and they talk a lot. So Niecy Nash's character knows a lot about what Isabel's doing. And she posits the question, do you think slavery in the United States was a result of racism, essentially? And Niecy Nash's character says, well, yeah. And Isabel says, well, no, I think it's because of caste. And that statement in and of itself could be like, what the hell are you talking about? But the way she breaks it down, she really makes it very clear that she has a very good point. And then Niecy's response is that if you can take what you just said to me and keep it that simple, but expound on it, you could really get people on board. And I think that was a very good scene because I think that kind of explains the approach of this movie and book.
Mm-hmm. Because the results, as she says, are different between what's happened in the U.S., Germany, and India, but the framework is the same.
Because she also offers this idea that, like, do you really think that these, white people who would have black slaves would let these, like black women raise their children if they really thought they were monsters? And no. This is just an idea that they're perpetuating to oppress people and make them feel inferior, which is her entire argument. Mm-hmm. And then the Connie Nielsen scene.
Connie Nielsen's this woman in Berlin who I'm not sure what she is or does, but is clearly scholarly in some way, and kind of stating how you can't compare the Holocaust and the death of millions of Jews to slavery in America. Like she's very adamant that those two aren't comparable at all. And Isabel in this moment isn't able to articulate, and which is why I think the Niecy Nash barbecue scene is so well done, because by the time she has been able to process this, she's able to nail exactly what she wants to say. Also compared to when she pitches this to Vera Farmiga.
That's right. And they're kind of confused. Like, I'm not quite sure what you're saying, but I like the way that big old brain of yours thinks. And so if you can make me understand, I think this would be a great read.
Which, for somebody that is often frustrated about trying to get thoughts out of my head, like that's Aunjanue Ellis is really good in that scene, I think. Because we know what she's trying to say already, but the pain of trying to kind of put something out that's not even at a first draft level is, I don't know, I could feel her frustration in trying to get her point across in that moment.
A lot of the visuals used during the sort of like scenes where we are in Nazi era Germany, or when we are seeing the Dalits in India, like their job is to clean like public toilets, which are really like outhouses, and we see these people literally dive into like fecal matter to unplug clogs or whatever. Those are very powerful. I think the most upsetting are the visuals of the passage of slaves from Africa on the ships. So those are very emotional. I think the scene where I got the most emotional is when Niecy Nash's character dies, and her husband puts Isabel on the phone, like on speakerphone.
Because she's in India.
Because Isabel's in India at the request of Niecy Nash. Because Isabel does say, I know you're sick, I could stay. And Niecy says no. Like, I'll be upset if you don't go and do what you need to do. But now Niecy's on her deathbed. She's still alive, but not really responding. So we have Isabel on speakerphone with the phone on Niecy's shoulder, talking to her. And that I thought was very, very well done.
I think the scene with the little boy that comes at the end is also
that as
very
well,
done.
yes. Mm-hmm. So a good example of what I was left hungry for is we see towards the end, when Isabel meets Vera Farmiga again, and Vera's like, girl, are you going to meet this self-imposed deadline you gave yourself? Because we need this transcript. She says, yeah, I'm going to get to it. And we see that her characters now become motivated, and she's in her mother's house, and things are getting done, renovations are getting done, and she has brought out this big whiteboard. And she is identifying the different pillars of her argument. And that I thought was like, I wanted more of that. I think what I really wanted was the actual person, like Isabel Wilkerson, to like present her work and literally outline everything.
Like in a TED Talk.
Yeah, that's I think what I wanted. And then it could have been sprinkled with dramatizations of the experiences but yeah, that when she was going through her pillars, she doesn't really describe them. We just see her writing them.
We don't yet. I don't think that DuVernay goes through. She doesn't name all of them.
No, she doesn't. She says like number one, like on the whiteboard, is endogamy, which is this idea of like not like mixing races and controlling marriage and
mating. Mm-hmm.
Others are like sort of brainwashing people into believing in inherent superiority and inferiority, terror and cruelty, purity versus contamination, which then leads into the story about the little black boy in the pool. I thought that segment alone could have been the foundation for the entire movie. It's just all the pillars and then citing examples. But as it is, it feels a little elementary in the sense that like we really just get these two aha moments in Berlin and India, and then a few anecdotes. When I wanted them to slap me with 5-hour-long episodes with nothing but receipts.
Sure, but I think for a certain type of audience member, this will feel a lot more impactful than maybe some of us that have thought beyond ourselves at some point beyond this on this particular subject matter. But I think the film also sets out what it sets an example of what Isabel herself and her research has done, like finding those discoveries that relate to what she's trying to say in Berlin and India. I mean, there are things that I learned reading her book, like the anthropologist, the black anthropologist in the 40s.
That's right.
That wrote Deep South, that sounds fascinating and deserving of a miniseries of its
Those
own.
anthropologists are initially in Berlin, so they're kind of tied into that segment. But yeah.
As the Nazis come to power, and then they start this anthropological experiment with a white couple in Mississippi. And I mean,
I would like to read their study.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's just things casually you learn by absorbing something like this that make this not only the type of cinema I want to support, but I don't know, compelling and interesting.
I did like how the film ends because we see her type the last line of her book, which is a world without caste would set everyone free. And then after that, we see her going through her mother's house that she's finally renovated, which is symbolic of...
Yeah, I like the metaphor used for that.
Because initially we see her in the house and she doesn't want to put in the work to renovate it, even though the realtor's telling her, if you spend a few $1,000s and a little bit of your effort, you could get a much bigger profit. And so she ultimately decides to do so.
And then relays that back to it's America is, or whatever country you live in, it's like you bought an old house that nobody that was around the time the house was built is still alive, and it's filled with cracks and has all kinds of issues, and you got to fix those things.
Yeah, but the idea is that even because she says, like, a lot of people today will say, well, I never owned slaves. I never did this. I never gassed Jewish people. But it's like, okay, but you were in this house that has that damage, and so now you're responsible for it. Like she says, the cracks won't fix themselves.
Yeah, how are we going to deal with the foundational problems?
So if there's any additional deterioration, like the problems we continue to have, that's on our watch. So I thought it was a very effective wrap-up.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know, like DuVernay always gets really great cast for her film. There are so many people that are like Donna Mills pops up in two scenes. She really has nothing to do. Blair Underwood, and we already talked about most of the other notable faces that pop up. But yeah, I just thought it was. I don't know who will eventually be attracted to this film because it occupies a very interesting space and has a very unique energy to it.
I think if you're interested in watching it, then you should watch it with other people and be prepared to have a adult conversation.
And if you haven't read the book, maybe this will lead some back to the original text as well.
What would you give Origin?
3.5. I
would give Origin 3.5 out of 5. Hit the thanks button, listen to our podcast. Bye.